Well, hi everybody, this is Dr. Drake 63 here. Today, I'm gonna do a little bit of a deep dive into the internals on this Galil Ace. This is in 7.62x51. It's been a series of videos on this particular firearm, which I'm quite fond of. And today, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the internals. After, somewhere around 750 rounds of .308 through this. Going to take a good look and I'm going to compare it to the internals of what I consider be one of the gold standards of the AK platform, and this would be the SLR 104 from Arsenal. A lot of talk these days about what kind of quality Arsenal's putting out with their 7.62x39 versions, and there's some concerns out there. This one's a few years old, and like I said, I consider this to be somewhat of the gold standard. So I'm going to take what I consider two of the better AKs you can get, or AK derivatives, modernized AKs. We're going to look at what the insides look like and see if they're doing what they're supposed to. Some of you might say, well, Dave, why are you comparing these two rifles? They're different calibers. One's Israeli, the other's Bulgarian. Well, inside, they use the AK operating principle, which is a gas block with a piston that's driving the whole thing. And you see you've got the exact same thing here. And internals are internals. But again, why am I picking these two? I've owned many AKs. I've owned Romanian AKs, Yugoslavian AKs, and I use the term plural, Russian. So I've had quite a few different versions of these to mess around with, even an American built out of Polish parts kits. So when I talk about the best built ones, I'm talking with a little bit of experience here, and I like to compare that. So I do want to give you guys a bit of a nerd alert. This is not a shooting video. This is a video where we're looking at parts and parts wear. So beware. First of all, I got to tell you, nothing can be easier than taking down your standard AK. Make sure that everything's good. You've got a button to push here on the back of the dust cover. You pull that off. You're exposing your operating mechanism, which is basically made up of your spring and your bolt, and there you go. We've taken it down. You can go further and take down the gas tube. I'll go ahead and do that in a minute, but here you go. This is where you be. So nothing could be easier than doing that. We're going to set these parts aside. As far as taking down the gas tube as well, again, pretty easy situation. Here you go. Now we're taking a look at this Galil. And outside of the magazine coming off easier, everything else is a different story altogether. Okay. Well, here, to get this sucker off, you need almost Herculean strength. It's crazy. You've got to make sure this button's pushed in. And then you have to be able to push back on it and upwards at the same time. It's really nuts. I know some guys will grab an optic to do it. I'm not going to do that. So what I'm really doing here, we'll start over. I've cycled the bolt back, and as you can see, one of the things that keeps this dust cover so tightly in place is this extra long button to release the dust cover. And what I want to do is push it in far enough that it engages internally, okay? And if you look real close, you'll see that it's not sticking out at all. The metal is here. So here's the tricky part. I don't want to pop that out. I want to get that out. So I used my thumb and I pushed like crazy on that sucker. Okay, so there's your dust cover. Now, as you can see, we're back to a situation which is very AK-like. You've got a guide rod. You've got a piston. Okay. And this is a different setup for taking off your gas tube, where you have that front gas block engagement with a typical AK. This one just kind of slides right on in here, and it's kind of a two-piece affair that incorporates the dust cover from the rear, so you can see that. And then there you go. So not a lot of fun in terms of getting that dust cover off. A lot of guys complain about getting them on. I'll show you, that's not hard for me at all. Okay, so we're going to kind of zoom in here and take a look at these two rifles side by side. Both of them are side folders. They incorporate two different ways of doing it. Here you've got an external spring. This really does not slide into the rear trunnion. What you have is a roll pin that holds a plate that slides in. Here on the SLR 104, you've got a mechanism right here that is basically part of the trunnion, and you push that and you get your side folding that way. Now, actually, between the two, I prefer the side folding mechanism of the SLR 104 to the Galil. I'll just go ahead and make that part clear. But let's get up and take a look at this thing, at some of the parts that count. Obvious differences. You've got your rear sight here with the SLR, more of a traditional AKM kind of scenario where you see it's built into this trunnion. Okay. Whereas here, your rear sight on the Galil is actually all the way back here on the back of the dust cover, which, as we know, is going to lend itself to a bit more accuracy. But taking a look at this, you'll see that there's quite a bit of brass getting beat up in here, and there's a lot of talk about these being overgassed. I know if I was a reloader, that would be an issue for me. But just looking at this here, what kind of things are we looking for? First of all, right here, where the bolt carrier group slammed shut. Is that worn? Is that defaced? Anything of that nature? Answer is no. And as we compare that, coming over here to the SLR 104, same thing. After closer to 4,000 rounds on the SLR 104, the answer is no. You can see where it comes into contact with it, but in terms of metal degradation, being malformed in any way, no. A couple notable differences. If you look right here, you'll notice that has what I call an M4 type feed ramp. Reason for that is the magazine has this kind of double stack kind of configuration that you'd see with an M4. So it's got to be able to feed from both sides, which it does. Okay. But looking at the internals of this firearm, it's a chrome lined barrel, cold hammer forged, just like what you get with this guy right here. And the chambers look nice and smooth, nice kind of polished from wear. So looking at both of these guns, they hold up well to taking quite a beating. Now, the difference here is this is a 5.45 cartridge that's exploding, for lack of a better word, inside of this firearm, and here you've got a much bigger cartridge in 308. So in terms of doing a side-by-side comparison, a lot more explosive force is happening with your 7.62 NATO on the right. I call it 308. There is slight difference. Your 7.62 NATO versus 5.45 on the left. Now, I use the word trunnion, and that's not really correct for a Galil because it is a milled frame. This frame is made out of a milled block of steel. Okay, whereas on the SLR, it's trunnions, which are forged pieces of metal that are encased by a stamped piece of steel. Okay, that's a millimeter thick, and it's bent to that square shape. This is a block of steel. Okay, so you have to believe that that's going to be able to withstand higher forces, and it does, and it weighs more, so there you go. Trigger mechanism looks about the same. If you look at where the hammer is, you can see it's not getting a strange deformation. And again, like I said, this particular firearm here, 4,000 rounds. And pretty tidy looking affair. Moving our way forwards to the gas blocks. On the left, you see the Galil. And on the right, you see the SLR. A little tiny bit of what I think is corrosion going on here with the SLR, so we'll clean that out. I have shot 7N6 in there before and cleaned it out, but you never know with some of this cheap ammo. And I'd have to say very well built, both of these, and they should be. I paid a small fortune for these rifles. Next, we're going to take a look at the bolts, the bolt carrier. This is from the SLR, like I said, about 4,000 rounds, and actually I'm just kind of impressed. I mean, yeah, you have some wear on it, duh, but in terms of, you know, are you talking about the kind of wear that's a problem? The answer is no. If you look at the tail, and this is an area that you look at, is that mushrooming? Is that getting bent? A little bit. But this is about the same as it was after several hundred rounds. In other words, it's profiling itself to the hammer that's hitting it, and then it pretty well stops. So nothing that I'm concerned about at all. And the rest of this looks like it's in basically perfect shape, and the piston's doing its job. It's absorbing quite a bit of carbon. But as far as the rest of this goes, the things that we need to see what's happening down in your channel right here. Is it getting deformed? Not at all. In fact, you could clean this up. It's going to look like the day I got it. So very impressed with that from the SLR. Taking a look at the firing pin and the extractor, everything's like you want it to be. You know, they talk about these guns having a lifespan of 50, 60,000 or more rounds, and I believe it. Simplicity, really, in design. Okay, now moving over to the bolt group for the Galil. You're going to expect a lot more carbon. You're going to expect it to be taking a bigger beating just because you've got, like I said, a bigger explosive force going on. And as we look at this particular tail, you don't see anything that's abnormal. It's not becoming a shape that's not going to work mechanically. Same kind of thing. If you look at the tail there, it will profile to the hammer. It will profile to the hammer. So that part's going to happen no matter what you do. Now, as far as pulling this guy out and looking at the channel here, same thing. No deformation, no pitting, nothing that makes you worry about the future of that particular piece. And looking here at looking here at the bolt face, you see some red on there. I fire a lot of ammo that has like a red lacquer mark on the base of the ammo. I'm not worried about that, but the extractor looks good. And again, you're talking about the same basic design. There's a spring in there, and here's your extractor. I would just imagine that what you need to do with this type of a caliber is maybe clean it more often, maybe take a better look at some of the parts, because again, you've got that much larger explosion taking place in the chamber. But gas tube wise, here you go. Nothing big going on here. Love the design of this gas tube. You'll see there's a notch right here that this dust cover also has. And that fits in perfectly and locks up tight. So we're going to find out how well this holds zero when we put this back on with this Holosun optic. I've got half of mine to take that Holosun optic off. It works great out to about 150 yards, and then beyond that, you know, things just start getting small. You want to have magnification. But we've talked about the Holosun optic, so. But that's it. A couple AKs doing what AKs do, which is fire over and over and over again. Now you notice this upside down Century Arms mat. Here's my my warning to you guys about Century Arms. I'm sorry, I'm not going to turn it around. It's that way on purpose. I got sent this because I bought their AK-74 Sporter, which was a Polish parts kit that had head spacing problems and was just basically a piece of crap from the get-go. I called, they did give me a refund and sent me some swag. This cleaning mat is part of it. I want no part of a Century Arms built firearm, but that's okay. But again, looking at these parts here, everything doing what they're supposed to. These are guns that we shoot the heck out of, and they're doing what they're supposed to do. And what we're going to do right now, which I don't need to show you, is wipe these down and give them a good cleaning. One thing I do like to show, I am a big fan, as I've showed before in prior videos, of Breakfree. Just stuff that holds regardless of temperature, cold or hot. I put a few drops of this in the channel. Okay, I said I wasn't going to show you these after I'd wiped them down. I lied. Wanted to point out on both of these firearms, since they're imports, you need to have a total, I believe, of 9 or 10 compliance parts that are made in the U.S. So what's real typical with a lot of these AKs is the front head of this piston is typically a U.S. made part. So I wanted to point that out. If you happen to replace your pistons with foreign-made stuff, you may not be in 922 compliance. And in the wisdom of our government, having this be a U.S.-made part makes this a much safer firearm. Not sure. More nerd alert stuff. You can see right here that this gas tube has a notch that slides into. You see this ring right here, and that's what holds it in place. Okay, and so what's going to happen then, and when you put this back in, you need to kind of not all the way go in, put your bolt in, and then you slide it in. And that's what locks this in place so well. And then once we put the rest of this in place, and you see that notch down there, see that right there, that's when we get busy on securing the rest of this. But I did a little bit better than average job of cleaning out the interior there and cleaning off the feed ramp and so forth, because I don't like taking this thing apart all that much. And you probably don't want to. Okay. So as I showed you, we don't want to take this all the way back and put it in this channel like that. That's the lock position. We want to set it right up So it's just right there. And then the cycling of the bolt will pop it back into place. But here's the fun part, guys, is getting this back on. Now, as you see, there's this notch that's going to pop right into this area here, okay? But then your next piece you have to contend with is this is so tight. You know, if you're used to dealing with AKs, that dust cover is a pretty loose affair, which is why 1913 rails, Weaver style rails, Picatinny, whatever you want to call it, which is why these rails typically aren't worth a shit, is because there's too much wiggle and your optics are off. Not the case with these. So, as you can see, I'm going to line up this notch right here. I'm going to seat this portion right over the bottom. As you can see right here, there's a little gap, and that's where this needs to sit. And it's not an easy thing to do, but I'm going to show you how to do that, and it needs to sit so that that pops down into that gap, and then we can cycle the bolt. And we're locked and loaded. Not locked and loaded, but we're locked in place. So let me show you how I do that. So I've got everything lined up. I've got my spring is pushed down just shy where it needs to be. So how am I going to get this back? Watch this. Karate chop. It's in place. That's it. It popped in place. This is not going anywhere. Now all I need to do, and look real close right here, all I need to do is cycle the bolt. Did you just see that come out? We are now snug as a bug. We're snug as a bug, and that popped right out. I see this question a lot from guys on Facebook forums, different forums. How do you get that back in? And as I showed you, a little bit of a karate chop. It pops it in place. You cycle the bolt. This extra long spring knob, for lack of a better word, comes out, and this is not going anywhere. Now the proof's in the pudding, but if you look up ahead, you see the circle and the dot, which are on the Holosun. And you really can't tell from this shot, but we're lined up exactly where we need to be with respect to the front sight. And when you look at a lot of the various systems for mounting a rail to the top of an AK, they fail because they will not hold zero. But I can take this out and it's going to hold zero. Might have a click one way or the other. But these things are built for combat accuracy, and that's what you'll get out of that. So a bit of a nerd factor video, without a doubt. Okay, so we have showed you today how to take down and put back together your Galil Ace, the 308 or 762 NATO, as it's the correct technical term. It's going to work the same way as your other variants, your other calibers, but that's how you do it. That's how you take it down. That's how you clean it. And also wanted to give you a comparison with another fine AK derivative, I should say, AKM, which is the Arsenal. So what we have here is a fine firearm. It can be a little bit tricky. It's a 308, so there's a heck of a lot going on inside here, but I've been very, very pleased with the way this thing is performed. It's accurate. It's durable. Keeping an eye on the parts for wear and things like that. Are there any warning signs? My hat's off to the guys, to our guy Rob, I should say, at AK Operators Union. He's really the first guy that said, hey, look at your internals and see what's going on to determine what's a good firearm. And I've learned a lot from him and from my own personal experience combined. And things look great with this firearm. I'd recommend this to anybody. Somebody says, gosh, but I don't want to spend, $1,800 or $2,000 on an AK. Well, if you can afford it and you want one that's going to last, that's as good as they get, I'm going to tell you right now, the Galil is as good as it's get. It takes a proven design. It takes some ingenuity and some perfection on top of that. kind of a combination from what you see with prior adaptations of this, and very pleased with what we end up with. So that's all for today. I want to thank you for watching this particular video. Again, I gave you a nerd alert up front. If you fell asleep, I'm sorry. But for those of you guys who are into parts, for those of you guys who are into how do you clean, how do you take them down without it being a big major issue, I hope this helped you out. As always, this is Dr. Drake 63, recommending that you support the National Rifle Association and any pro-Second Amendment organization. The time for us to stick together is now, guys. I'd very much like to think that my grandkids are going to be able to enjoy firearms like this, and that they're not going to go to the grave with me. Thanks again, and have a great day. Got it?